So hi there and welcome to today's art class. This is the pastel art class for beginners and intermediate adult classes. And today we're going to be painting this beautiful forest light, which is a gorgeous picture. I know it might not excite everyone, but what I really loved about this one was the darks and the lights. And I think it's going to be such a lovely one to do, and we can really focus on some tones. So these are the notes that you should have received when you got your class, and you would have received a JPEG image also of this picture. So I've got mine set up next to me here on an iPad so that I can look at both options and zoom in and get in nice and close if I need to. So I'm just going to share my screen now onto my tabletop so that you can see what I'm doing, and we'll work together as we go through the class. So just bear with me while I press a few buttons and get things hooked up. And hopefully that will come up in a moment. So what you'll be able to see now is my desktop or table, and I've got my art diary there. So that's all ready to go. And I've got my little notes here next to me, so I like to keep those close by so I can refer to them. You can see my printer has put lines all through there. It's not actually what's in the picture. The picture doesn't have all the stripes through it. It does, however, have a cross line on it. So you can see here, you've got a center line running across the middle and another one down the middle there. So that just divides our picture up into 4 sections, and it just makes it a little bit easier to break down into pieces as we draw it. So for the first part of today's class, we're going to be drawing in charcoal, and that's the way most classes run. We do the picture in charcoal so that we can have a nice little practice run at drawing the picture. It's also a good way to figure out the tones, to look at the black and white image that you have on your notes there, and look at the lights and the darks. And you can see just by looking at that how hugely bright this area is here, which is your bright yellows and gold colours here in the foreground. And you can see that looks white on the black and white version. So it's very dark, this picture. And we've just got a few really bright sections that give it some depth and a little bit of mystery. So the first thing you want to do is to set up your page ready for sketching onto. So I'm using an art diary. You can use drawing paper or just plain cartridge paper if that's all you've got handy. And I like to use willow charcoal. Willow charcoal is lovely and soft, so you can smudge it with your fingers and push it around and get it to be softer and lighter, and then add more as you go if you want to darken it off a little bit. So I've got a reasonably long stick there. Most of these are all broken because they've been well loved and used. I like to have a long finish stick, and then I like to have a shorter fat one that I can use on its side just to fill in the area quickly, and with not such fine marks. So a short fat piece is a good option if you have some. If not, just break off a piece from another long stick so that you've just got a little piece that you can kind of just rub over your page like this to get some nice effects happening. All right. So I'm just going to, I'm just going to mute everyone, I think. There we go. Just there's a little bit of noise in the background. It's a bit distracting. There's also a clock ticking here. Is that annoying anyone? Should have asked that before I turned you all onto mute. I might remove it. Actually, I think it's going to be quite annoying. So I'll just get rid of the clock. In the meantime, draw up your page in a portrait shape. So that's the shape of the picture we're doing today. And then we're going to start to shade it in charcoal. Okay, so by looking at the black and white picture, and you can also refer to the colour one, but you can see because I've broken it down into quarters, so on the coloured version we've got our dividing line, breaking it up into pieces. Just going to check my lighting, it's a bit bright. There we go, that's a bit better. Okay, so we've got, when you do this in your drawing, it's easier to break your picture into sections and then just focus on each small section rather than trying to do the whole thing all at once. It just makes it a little bit easier for your brain and sort of isn't quite as stressful or overwhelming if you do it in small pieces. Okay, so have your picture close by and we might look at the colour version to start with. And what we're going to look for at the moment is just the really bright areas. So if we start down here in the bottom left-hand corner, you can see that down in the base there, in the bottom section here, it's really dark. So what I'm going to be looking for mostly in this exercise is patches of colour or patches of tone. So it's really dark across here. Yeah, and it goes up probably about a third of the way up inside that quarter. It's quite dark across that foreground area. And then as you come up, it gets a little bit lighter. So we've got a lighter kind of grey tone as we come up through there. And then we've got that really bright white area in around the centre section here. So I'm just going to kind of lightly outline the shape of that so that I can find where the white needs to be. Because we're working with a black charcoal, you don't want to fill in that white area because the page is actually your white. So use the colour of your page to be the lightest tone in your picture. And of course, we've got kneadable erasers here that you can rub it out with if you need to. And then as we come above that white section there, see how it gets quite dark again here? So it darkens off quite a lot, almost up to the halfway line, and then it goes into a lighter grey. So I'm still referring back to the colour version as I'm looking at this because I can see the different colours and the tones that they make. And varying the pressure with my charcoal. So if you press harder, you're going to get a lovely dark mark. And then as you come up towards that middle grid mark, just press a little bit lighter. And that'll give you that lighter grey. So just press lightly, and if you have gone a bit dark, you can always smudge it a little bit with your fingers and soften it off. So I like to put my fingers in here and move things around. So that's essentially the main kind of tone or shapes that we want to put into that quarter. Okay. Now there's also a tree and a few branches and things that are running across there. We might continue up into the top left quarter first. Once we've got all that background information in, then we can put those harder lines in that represent the trees there in the foreground. So if you keep moving up into the top left quarter, and we're just carrying on with the same kind of tone of grey into that top section. So that's that mid-green colour in the grass. And then as you come up, you can see on the left-hand side of the grey image, it's darker on that left area there. So we've got a little bit of a dark patch through here. Okay. And then we've got a mid-tone grey kind of tree. So that's sort of mid-tone through here. Just do colour blotches for now. We're not putting any detail in there. Just try and see it as shades of grey, basically. Don't worry about what it is. Just focus on the tones that you can see. Okay. And then as we move across towards the centre of the picture, it gets dark again. So we've got darker tones coming across through there. So you can see I'm using my little short piece of charcoal just to press down on its side, so I'm covering more area with it and getting a darker tone down onto there. And then up in, oh, that's on the other side. Okay, won't worry about that bit yet. So they're kind of the tones that we want to be able to get into the background, basically, of the picture. Oh, Lynn's come back. One moment. Sorry, she must have left. There we go. She's back. Are you back, Lynn? Okay, good. We lost you for a minute there.
Yeah, this computer. Just want to throw it out the window some days.
I know that feeling well. Yeah.
All right.
All right. You okay? You good to go?
I think so. Where are we?
I'll carry on. Okay. So we've just put the darks and the lights down on the background on the left-hand side of the image. Now, before we move over to the other side, I just want to show you what we're going to be doing next with this. So you can see in the, just pull the picture across so you can see what I'm talking about. In the foreground here, on the bottom left, you can see there's a tree or a branch that kind of runs across that way. And then there are a few that go upright as well. If you've got your image on an iPad or a screen, it might be a little bit clearer to see. Often if you print them out on a home printer, they don't quite come out as clearly as you'd like, as you can see on mine, because I've got all these funny stripes through there. But coming up through there, you can see that branch and then a few upright branches as well. And then over on the right-hand side of this top quarter that we just did, you can see a few darker patches through there. So they're branches as well. So we can kind of look at that now and go back to what we've done so far and just draw in, just lightly, a few of those lines to get that feeling of the trees and the branches and the things that are going on through there. You just want to use the end of your charcoal stick, so a narrow charcoal stick will work. And you just want to do a few wispy sort of lines through there to try and, indicate the feeling of the trees that are growing through this magical forest. And as you move up towards the top of the picture, I'm just shading a little bit more in here, changing my shape slightly. So we've got that lovely tree there in the center of this section. And it's actually catching quite a lot of light on the branches. But the center branch of that is a darker tone. So you can kind of just put that in quite lightly with your bit of charcoal. And there's a few little branches coming out of that as well. And just to indicate the shape of that. And so because there's a little bit of light and dark going on in this tree, it's going to be fun to do in colour. A little bit more challenging in the grey, but not impossible if you want to stick with it and persevere. And you can always use your eraser to take out some of the dark. So if you feel like some of it's a little bit too dark, get your eraser and remove some of the charcoal with that. Now, the other thing I've noticed is that there's almost a horizon line. I know this is a forest of trees, but if you look, it's just above your halfway grid line. So if my halfway grid is here, the horizon line, well, what I can see seems to be like a dark shadow runs all the way across here and across the base of that tree that we were just talking about. So I'm moving over now into the right-hand quarter. And there's just a dark shadow kind of shape there that runs through. It's almost like where the sun isn't hitting the grass, and then there's probably shadow from trees and things. And then behind that, it gets a little bit lighter just through this section here. So I can leave that little bit white or light. You can see that in the picture. A little bit lighter just through there. And then I've got quite a lot of dark. So I'm over on the right-hand quarter now. Quite a lot of dark running through there. So if you put your dark charcoal down through there, run that around. So as I said earlier, we're not doing a lot of detail at this point. We're just looking at the tones and the shadows and the shapes. So dark through there. Then we've got a couple of quite light tree trunks, haven't we? So you can draw those in lightly. This first one on the left is slightly off center, so it's around about there-ish on the left-hand side of that quarter. And then the other lighter one, I've skipped over the dark one for a second. There's a lighter one here that comes down in front, actually, of our dark horizon line. I'm going to call that a horizon line so that you know what I'm talking about when I refer to it as we move on. Okay, so they're our lighter trees, and as I said earlier, when you want to put light back in, you can do that with your kneadable eraser. So I'm just going to darken off in between those trees because it's quite dark through there. The other thing to take note of while you're doing this is this the darkest, or is there something darker that I need to allow for in my tones? So when I say that kind of thing, what I'm referring to is there's a couple of dark tree trunks coming up in this area as well. So I don't know if you can see it clearly. Or actually, we missed two over here. I talked about them and then I didn't put them in properly. Just hopping back over to the left side again. A couple of dark sections there. So what I was referring to was when you do your darks and lights, make sure that you don't look at what's darkest and allow for that. So try not to darken off things that are not as dark as that. So you've got to really be quite aware of the tones that you're doing and how light and dark everything is. All right, so this is just a very rough little rehearsal. Don't get too caught up in the detail. We could spend hours just doing this in charcoal. It'd be quite beautiful, actually. Anyway, I'll hop back over here. So on this top right quarter, we've got a dark tree trunk about there. I should do it with my long one rather than my short stick of charcoal. That comes down to just above the halfway line. Then we have the light one that we've put in, and that's got lots of dark around it. So to make something light, it's got to have dark next to it. If you want to brighten something up, then darken whatever's around it, and it'll make it shine. Okay, so I've got dark down through there, and then we've got this light one on this side, and then we've got another big dark one, dark tree that sort of comes down through here and down into the next quarter. So that's quite dark through there. So rehearsing this and getting to know where things are within this and the shapes and tones is going to be really helpful for us as we move on to the colour version. So it's always good to have a little rehearsal. Okay, so I'm just going to smudge those trees off a little bit that we did nice and light, and then they've got, branches crisscrossing them, so there's lots and lots of branches. There's lots of movement and activity and different directions and shapes and things happening in here. So I'm just going to very lightly run my charcoal around just to indicate a few of those shapes of branches that are sitting in front of the tree trunks that we can see there. And coming behind here, so this grass area here is darker behind that one, light there. So see how we're sort of building up this forest and focusing on all the lights and the darks. Okay, so the next part we need to look at is this bottom right-hand quarter. We'll get all the shading in there, then we'll refine it a little bit, and then we'll get onto the colour version. So if you look at your shapes in that one, you can see we've got this dark shape that kind of comes around like this. So can you see that kind of curved shape on the bottom right corner there? And everything in that corner is quite dark. So I'm just going to darken that off like that. So always look for shapes too. It really helps to find where things sit and how they fit together when you look for the shapes. So there's a very definite curved dark section down through there. And then if you look across from just below your halfway line, so that's quite a light tone through there because that's where all that bright gold and lighter grasses are. So the sun must be coming through and catching that area there. And that's what makes this dark tree trunk look light, because we've got all that beautiful golden light behind it. I think this is going to be delicious in colour. Okay, and then coming forward from that one, we've got almost a shadow running across horizontal across this area here into the other side. So it's like a dark shadow area running through there. And then on the other side, it's dark as well. And then it's sort of mid grays down below that. So below that dark tree trunk, it's kind of mid-grey tones. And that's when we come back into that really bright middle area there where the grass is just glowing beautifully. And so you can leave that white, or you can put a little bit of charcoal on there and then take it out with your eraser. There is a lot of variation in that tone there. Okay, so noticing, again, checking on your black and white picture just to see where the lights and the darks are. And it's amazing when you follow that little system of filling in the quarters or the segments. You can break your picture down into even more segments if you wanted to. You can turn it into 8ths or 16ths or whatever. It really does help to just simplify it for you. And then when you get it finished like this, you can sit back and go, oh, okay, that's all coming together now. So it's a really good little system and a great way to practice your art. And so then you can just fiddle around a little bit with some of the tones and the shades. Again, just noticing the shapes. There's, shadows kind of falling horizontally as well as vertically. And that's what makes this forest so mystical and lovely. It kind of feels warm because we've got all this beautiful golden light in there, but it's also feeling a little cold and mysterious too. So when you are planning to do a painting, it's always a great idea to, have a go at it just in charcoal. Have a little sketch. As you sketch, you might think, oh, maybe I need to crop this a bit more. I could make it smaller, or you can leave things out if something's too distracting. Maybe this branch over on this side is too distracting and doesn't really work for you. So this is also a time when you can kind of look at that and decide, which parts you want to keep and what you'd like to change. Maybe you'd want to make one of the trees bigger, or whatever it is. You're the artist, so you get to choose what you do. But it's kind of fun because it gives you a little insight into what this will look like when it's done in your colours. And of course, there's nothing wrong with doing it in charcoal either. Charcoal's beautiful to work with, so it's a really nice medium. And if you're inspired to do that, then by all means, jump in and do it because it's gorgeous. I love working in charcoal. You can get compressed charcoal as well, which will come out darker than this one. This is the willow, so the willow's quite soft, and it's a natural charcoal. It's actually the shape of the trees, and that's why you won't get precise sizes in your willow charcoal. They'll all be a little bit different, a little bit bent because it's natural. Whereas your compressed charcoal is not man-made, but it's charcoal, but it's compressed by machinery, and it will actually be darker. So if you want a really dark charcoal, use compressed. And then you can also get charcoal pencils. So they're great too for getting the finer lines and things in. And white charcoal pencils are gorgeous. You can use those with pastels as well. So this is a brand newie that I got recently. So the General's charcoal white, great, really nice. Not necessarily for this kind of thing, because if I use it, well, I guess I could use it in here just to get a little bit of light back in there. See how that's putting some light back in over the dark now? So you can use it like that, but I like to use it with pastels as well. Sometimes a charcoal pencil is better than a pastel pencil. It just seems to be a little bit brighter or whiter. So that's a good one to have in your toolkit. Often the art shops don't have a lot of them in stock because they sell really quickly. So when you see them, grab them. They're definitely worth having. Okay, so let's move on and get stuck into our colour version. The first thing we want to do is think about what colour paper you want to work on. And normally I will decide that based on my reference photo, excuse me. So this one is quite dark. It's got a lot of green in it. So if you've got a green paper, that would probably be really lovely. But I've decided to go black today because black or dark paper is going to actually save you making everything really dark. You can use the colour of the paper in your painting. So that will be a good option. So I've decided to go for black. Black's a great colour to work on, especially when you want to get those really bright colours popping on your dark backgrounds. So we'll pop aside the charcoal sketch for now. We've already had a rehearsal on that, so we've got a bit of an idea of how we're going to draw it up. And I've got my black paper here. So this is Colourfix paper. It's just trying to get it in the right spot on my table. So this is Art Spectrum Colourfix, quite scratchy, feels a little bit like fine sandpaper. Lovely to work on, holds onto your pastels really nicely. My new favourite paper is Pastel Matte. It doesn't feel as gritty as this, but it tends to hold on to a lot more pastel and produces less dust as you go. Okay, this is my little drawing board. So I'll just zoom out a little bit so you can see that. There we go. So this is just a little bit of masonite that I tape my paper onto. So this is old tape. I'm just going to get rid of that and start fresh. You can tape your paper down all around the edges, so around each side, or you can just tape it on each corner, whatever you prefer. I find if I'm sitting at a desk and I'm on a flat surface like this, just on each corner is probably enough. All you want to do is hold it still so that it's not going to fall down. And it just means that you've got two hands instead of having to use one of them to keep your paper still all the time. If you're on an easel, you might want to tape it all the way around on every side or top and bottom, just because that way, it's not going to fall off. So this tape is called, I think it's called 14-day tape, something like that. That's what painters use when they're edging things. I find it quite good, but if you do tape your paper down all the way around, just make sure you stick your tape onto your cloth or your clothing or something first, just to get some of that adhesive off, because it can tear. If you leave it on for too long, it can tear on your paper when you take it off at the end. So, and the last thing you want to do is tear it off and ruin your picture. So just make sure you get some of the adhesive off before you start. Okay, I'm just going to zoom in a little bit more now. Get a little bit closer. There we go, that's good. Okay, so I've got my paper all sorted out. I've decided to use black, and when you're working on a dark paper and you're drawing everything up, you'd probably be wanting to use a lighter pencil. Please use pastel pencil or charcoal. Don't use graphite or regular pencils. You'll find that they tend to kind of stain the paper and you can't get the mark off. So the first thing I want to do is put my grid mark on. I'm using a pastel pencil. It's a kind of a mid-pink colour. You could use white, whatever you have. I like to use something that's not too light, because then I know I'm going to be able to cover it up with pastels fairly easily, or take it off with my eraser. So I'm just making my halfway line through here. So it's this is 30 by 23, this piece of paper, so my halfway is 15 by 11 and a half. So just ruling that up. Always have a ruler nice and handy. And then I've got my grid lines on there. Okay. Just might make that a little bit darker. All right. So that's my grid line marked onto my paper. And then I can start to kind of mark in where things need to be. So I'm just going to very lightly mark in just those lighter areas. I sort of want to make sure I get the shape of those right. So just using my pencil, not pressing very hard. I just want to make sure I kind of mark out those little areas of light, because that's where I want to keep the paper clean. So the reason I'm doing this is to get the pastels to be nice and vibrant and bright. I want to try and avoid getting any darker colours underneath it, because if I put, say, when we block in the dark areas, if it gets into this light area, what it does, it gets caught on the paper, and I can try and take it off, but often it won't come off completely, and then you'll end up with contaminating the colour that you put down on top of it. So if you want a really pure, bright colour, and you don't want any other colours to kind of contaminate it, try to keep the paper pure underneath. That's my tip for the day. Okay, so I've got a little bit of light coming across through here. Just marking off these light sections. There's a little bit of light over there. So see how everything's just a shape? Break it down into shapes and it makes it a lot easier. Okay, the tree trunks I'm not too concerned about because they're not as bright as, well, that one there is, but where does that sit? About there. So I can try and leave a bit of that uncovered. And then the other tree trunk on this side here is not as light, but it's still lighter. That sits just on that side of that bright bit there. So I've drawn up, you know, just the basic kind of shapes that I want to make sure that I keep or don't lose track of, pretty much. So remember I talked about the horizon line before. It's that big dark shadow that runs almost all the way across the picture. And then above that, we've got a little light section. So the sun must be coming through behind there. And then it kind of gets all sort of mid-tones and darks and things above that. Okay. So I've got that drawn up. Next thing I need to do is pick out my colours. I didn't get that done before class. So I'm going to go over and start to do that. If my voice fades a little bit, it's just because I'm on the other side of the room. I'll try and speak a bit louder. So we need to choose colours like green, lots and lots of greens in there. I think purples and maybe some reddy browns, so some umber kinds of colours will be lovely. And then, of course, you want your gold and your yellow and your limey green. So remember to pick out colours that are in tones. So you want to make sure you've got lovely darks, lots of darks. So your blue violet, of course, will be go-to. I think some black will also be very nice. So blue violet is your deepest, darkest purple. If you've worked with me before, you know that that'll be one of my favourite darks that I always kind of go to. And then black, I'm going to go for an umber dark with a dark browny red colour. Just to get some warmth in there. If you look at the picture, you can see there's quite a lot of warmth. There's a fair bit of red in the timber and the trees. So a deep brown, red sort of colour. Maybe even a touch of orange or terracotta, something like that. Maybe, don't know. I'm going to pull it out and put it to the side. I'm undecided on that. And then we want to look at some greens and purple. So green in the grasses, obviously. So you want to get a couple of green. We want something fairly dark, like a phthalo green. That's a nice dark one. And then you want a mid kind of green for your middle kind of tone. So just try and get some greens out here. Green is, I love greens, but I never have enough of them. I just can't seem to get enough greens. It's a funny colour, green. And we want these grassy greens. And then we want some really bright green and yellow tinge to them. So like a limey kind of green, something with a bit of sunshine in it. And then you want your phthalo green, so your nice dark green, which I need to find more of. I've never seem to find my darkest green. Okay, I'm going to grab a yellow as well. Sort of like a golden sunshiny yellow. And then you'll want white, just for those little highlighted areas. There we go. What I've got is a little takeaway food container, so I just pop my pastels into that and then kind of hold that over my picture and sort of see what other colours I might need to add. I think that might be enough to start. Well, I did say purple, so like a darkish purple to put into the foreground there, you know, in the dark area in the front. So I think a deep purple mixed with some green would be quite lovely through there, and maybe a little bit of magenta. Magenta would be beautiful because that'll warm it up. So I'm just going to plop my colours here in front of you so you can see what I've picked out. So I've got black and then blue violet, that's that one there. I've got a dark brown or a reddy brown kind of colour, an umber. These are my greens, so that might be a bit cool. But anyway, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 greens. And then I've got a pale yellow, like a lemon yellow, and then I've got a sunshine yellow. That's that lovely golden one. I've got purple and magenta. I love magenta. If you don't have that one, that's absolutely fine. Just use whatever you've got. But I do love the warmth of that. Even some red might be nice. And then, of course, a bit of white to add the highlights on that tiny little bit of shiny piece in the centre there. I've also got this terracotta orange colour. I might use it, I probably will, but it won't dominate, I don't think, but it might be a nice one to blend in with my purples and greens and things to make some muddy colours. So that's my palette for now. And of course, it's nice to start off with a basic palette, and then as you go, you can kind of add colours if you need to. So don't feel like you can't pick up more colours as you go. But I find it's often better to start with just a few and go from there, so that you're not trying to have every colour in your little palette. It gets a bit overwhelming sometimes. So try to keep it simple. And then as you go, if you need to find something else or even mix up another colour, you can do that. So what we'll do now is take a little 10-minute break, and we'll come back and get stuck into it. And you're welcome to start getting stuck into it before then if you want to. All right. So I will return shortly. All right, so let's get going. And the first thing we're going to do is block in some of the colours. And we might start with the darks. Now, I know if you're working on dark paper, you might feel like you don't need to put too much dark in. But I still like to add, you know, a bit of warmth to my darker areas. So I'm going to start with my darker green, I think, because that's where I can see most of the dark areas within this. And then we can add in some purples and the browns and things to warm it up a little bit. So if you've got a short stick of pastel, that's probably the best option. If you have a long new stick, you might want to break it, because the way I like to use it is just lying it flat on my page like this and then just rubbing it across. Now, because I am on dark paper, I can leave some of my dark kind of showing through a little bit and let the black paper form some of the darkness underneath the green. So even though I'm putting green down where it's dark, I can still utilise that lovely black paper underneath. So I'm just putting a little bit of pastel down at this point. I don't want to do too much just yet because I want to give myself enough room to be able to add more layers as we go. Okay, now the other place that it's kind of dark is across here. Remember we talked about that horizon line that sort of runs right across the back of the picture there, sort of in between the trees. So I'm going to pop a bit of my dark green across through there as well, remembering to leave that little patch of light there if you can, and not obliterate it all completely. I'm just going to check my lighting here. I feel like it might be a bit too bright. There we go. I think that's okay. You should be able to see it. Let me know if you can't. Okay, so I've popped a bit of dark green down through there. There's another dark patch across here. Remember, if you can't kind of find where the darks are, just look at your black and white version again, and that'll help you to find where the darkest darks are. And I'm going to use my green for those kinds of areas. And I'm just also going to put a little bit of it up here in the background on the top of my page, because I want to start to get some of those colours into there. And if I pop them down underneath here, that'll start to form a nice kind of background area. Lovely. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is add a bit of purple or blue violet, or even some of your reddy brown. I'm going to go for blue violet into the darkest section. So down through here, now blue violet's got a lovely purple sort of tinge to it. So that's going to give me a really nice warmth and darken up that green nicely. So this is what you do with pastels. You don't kind of mix them on a palette like you do with other mediums. You can mix them on the paper, and we can push it all around afterwards. I'm just going to pop a bit of that blue violet onto the darkest section. So that's the horizon section that we talked about, where the shadow is. And then there's a little dark area in the center there. So just below your center line and above that really bright patch of grass. Because what's going to make that grass look brighter is having the dark around it. And then we've got lovely darks down through the foreground here. There's also quite a bit of dark in the background, and remember, now you can sort of draw in that tree trunk, that lovely dark one that runs down through that center section there in your top right quarter. There's another little dark trunk there. So see how I'm just starting to kind of draw in some lines to indicate the shapes of the trees. This painting, I think, will feel very kind of abstract because it's so loose, and we've got so much freedom with your shapes and where you put your tones and things. So I think it might be quite nice just to keep it a little bit loose and think more abstract than realism. Up to you, of course, but I thought it might make a nice abstract option. Okay, so now I'm looking at the background and the foreground actually. So I can see there's similar sort of colours in this area here. I've picked up my dark brown. I'm just going to zhoosh that around a little bit. Doesn't matter if you go over those dark trunks or trees slightly. All I want to do at this point is just get some colour down on there, because we're going to push it all in shortly. And that creates a lovely warmth. I'm going to put a little bit of it down on here too, through this foreground area. Bring a little bit of it up into where the lighter green's going to go, so that I can then start to merge those together nicely. So just running a bit of brown through there to make it a bit warmer. Okay, good. Now the other thing I want to do is start to patch in some of the green. So this is my next green. It's not my darkest one. It's the mid-tone green that I picked up earlier. So So I'm going to start putting a bit of that through here. Okay. And as I'm putting it down, as I'm putting down all these colours, I'm just kind of pressing pretty lightly. These pastels are reasonably soft. And so they're allowing me to press fairly lightly and just get a little bit of pastel down onto the paper without getting it too dark or strong. And see how that's now starting to pick up all the mid-tones. So that's going to be quite lovely. And as you put it down, just kind of move it around in different directions. Try to kind of keep your mark loose and sort of random, because what we're trying to achieve is a natural look. You want to, make sure this looks kind of bushy and grassy without having your marks too strong and too defined. So that's a little bit of the lighter green through there. I'm also going to run some of it just above that dark horizon line. Remember we talked about that before, and it's got this lovely sunshiny green section behind it there. I did mark some of that out before. I'm going to use this green to put that in there, and then I'll go over it again with my lighter green. That's starting to define the different sections of this now. So we're starting to see, the ridges and the hills and the shapes emerging because of the tones. So your tone is the shade that you're using. This is a mid-tone green, so it's not bright, it's not dark, it's in the middle. So it's my mid-tone, and that's working really nicely to start to bring together all the different levels of tones in here. So notice we haven't blended anything in yet. I'm trying very hard not to. I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do it for, but I haven't blended anything with my fingers yet. And it's up to you. If you want to start to push colours around with your fingers and blend them in and get them to all merge together to create a lovely, more smooth, I guess, look, and then you can add more pastel over the top again, up to you. Before I do that, I will probably do that, but before I do, I'm going to pick up my next lightest green. So these are my 3 greens. Just pop them there so you can see which ones I'm talking about. I've got a dark green, then I've got my mid, which I just finished using, and then I've got a lighter green. So my lighter green, I'm going to use around where the mids are, but where it's a little bit lighter. For instance, in here. Can you see how it's a little bit lighter just through there? So it's not much lighter than this mid. It's a similar tone, but it's slightly lighter. So it's just giving me a nice variation in tone. Now you might not have enough greens to do that. And if you haven't, then you could use possibly a blue or a yellow or an orange or something like that that's a little bit lighter in tone than the green we've just used. So what I'm trying to do is try and highlight some of those little green sections just a tiny bit more. And I know I've still got yellow in reserve, so I can always grab that and add my lightest lights. But this is nice just for a few little highlights of green here and there. So just running your eye around the picture, figuring out where the green's a little bit lighter or darker. And if you put this down and think, oh no, that should be darker, you can always put more over the top. So don't stress if you get it in the wrong spot. That's the nice thing about pastels. You can redo things really easily. Okay, and of course it's really quite light here. It's quite central, that little light section there. And remember, I've left my paper untouched in this section here because that's where I want to get that brighter colour. Okay, so it's starting to come together a little bit. And next thing I want to do is just because it looks nice, I want to try and get some of those lighter yellows in there. So again, this is my sunshine yellow. It's not my brightest, it's not the lightest, it's not the lemony one, it's more golden. Just want to start to get a few little speckly bits through there where I can see some sun. So there's some sun here, back right. bit through there. This will make it warmer and more inviting and will also enhance the darks. And just do loose marks. Don't worry about getting every blade of grass and every little thing in there. Just keep your marks quite loose. This is a really nice opportunity to have a crack at keeping everything sort of loose and not getting caught up in detail too much. So, doesn't that look lovely? I love how the light just pops on the dark. It just really makes it sing. So I can see a little bit of gold and yellow in here. And because this paper is textured, it's kind of picking up a little bit of the pastel, but it's not putting it, covering the whole thing, which is kind of good because it means that I can vary the pressure as I push it down onto the paper. So if you press lightly, you'll just get a very light sort of soft coverage. And then if you press harder, you should get a deeper colour, richer colour. And of course, that will all depend on the kinds of pastels you have too, and paper. So all those things work together to create different effects. So see how those little bits of yellow have suddenly, I'm excited about this, have suddenly highlighted those tiny areas that are catching the sun. And we can come back in later. Can you see those little like leaves and things? I'm just putting examples through here. Little bits of leaves or whatever that are catching the light through there as well. So we can come back in afterwards and pop more of those in, which will just be little random marks with the pastel. Gorgeous. There's a couple of little ones just here in the foreground too. Can you see those little leaves just down through there? Might need to use green for those rather than the yellow. But because I'm pressing lightly, it's picking up the colour that's already there, so it's not as bright. So this is a great exercise to see how tones in colour can really impact your painting. Gorgeous. And I've still got black in reserve, so I haven't used black yet. So that means I can actually go really dark on some of those darkest areas and make them pop out even more against the lights in the midst. So that's kind of exciting. So now we get to this point and you think, okay, do I want to start blending this in, or do I like the way the pastel's just sort of sitting on the paper like this? It's kind of almost a Monet effect, isn't it? It's quite loose and lovely. I'm kind of tempted to try and not blend and just work with it as it is. So let's try that today and see how we go. So biggest challenge is keeping fingers out. So now we've got all this basic first layer down, and we're ready to kind of start adding a little bit more information now. What I want to do is work from the back to the front. So that's normally how I like to work with a landscape. It's a lot easier to begin behind everything and then come forward, rather than, starting here at the front and then trying to get in behind the tree trunks and so forth to get the detail in down there. So what we need to look at now is the detail at the back of the picture, and just really study the shapes and the lines and the colours that are going on in there. And there's not a lot to see. It's kind of mystical, and it's got little bits of light. So the sun's coming through the tops of the trees and it's catching on some of the branches. And then where it's not catching, it's quite dark and shadowy. So what we want to do is try and get some of that darkness back into that area there. And it's kind of messy too, so it really lends itself to an abstract kind of design, this picture. And I picked up my black, but I'm going to actually grab my blue violet again. What I want to do is you want to just grab a short bit of pastel and start sort of smushing it around here in the background. I've got the blue violet, which is my dark one. I'm saving black for my darkest, okay? So what I want to do is just smush some of this around and start to create some depth and shadow. Okay, so I'm just going to get some pastels down on the paper, pretty much. And then we'll start to work on some of the highlights and the definition of the trees that are in there. So having this on an iPad is great because I can actually zoom in a little bit and check out more of the detail and see what's going on. Okay, so in the background there, it's like they're really scrubby kind of trees, aren't they? They're not beautiful green leafy ones. They're very kind of scrubby. There's not a lot of leaf because what we're seeing is the bottom of most of the trees and all the rough branches and things that are coming off them, but there's not a whole lot of foliage up around the top area there. The main tree that's highlighted is that one there on the left. It looks like a bit of a spidery kind of tree, and so it's got some lots and lots of branches that are sort of all like hair, you know, random sort of shapes going in all kinds of directions. I'm going to use this dark brown, and I'm just using the edge of it to get some of those shapes happening in there. And remember that they cross across the front of the tree trunk as well. So when you're drawing this, don't draw it, you know, just so you've got branches coming from the left and the right. You kind of want to bring it across the front and crisscross them over each other to create that lovely tangled web of mess. Now I know you can't see a whole lot there just yet because this is the darker colour, but it's going to contribute to building up the rest of it. And so if you have pencils, that would be ideal, but if you don't, then try to use your pastel sticks, but use the tip or the edge of them so that you're trying to get a fine line. I'll just show you an example. So this is a little square pastel, so it's got a really nice sharp edge on it, so I can get a really nice sharp line like that, and I can kind of drag it around on its edge and get all these little squiggly marks. So that's the kind of thing I'm doing with it on my paper. And then if I want a nice wide mark, I can lie it down and get a big, you know, covered area like that. But to get your finer lines, use the edges or the tips if you can. If you have a little round one like this one, for instance, that's my little black one, different brand, so it's a round pastel. Well, it was once. And so again, you can usually find a sharp edge on the top. So here on the edge, if you've broken a pastel, then you'll get a really nice sharp edge that you can use for fine lines. Failing that, pastel pencils are your friend. So if you don't have any yet, really good investment. So this is a Bronzeal brand. They're quite nice. And again, you can get your finer lines with those. Pastel pencils are great for things like fur and hair and stuff like that. So I also have the Faber-Castell, which is probably what I've got most of, and it's also a great pencil. So pencils for your fine lines or the edges of your pastels, whatever you can manage to use. Sometimes it's hard to get a sharp edge on your pastels because they're just too round or too soft, but have a crack at it. Now I'm just realising there's probably a colour I need to go and grab. I'm going to try this terracotta-y one first. I really don't want to put a whole lot of orange in here. I'm liking the yellows and the greens, but we need to get some highlights going on as well in amongst these squiggly branches and things. So I'm just going to pop a little bit of this in. And I'm also going to use this. Remember, we've got those two tree trunks at the back there that are quite light. There's one here, so I'm just going to use my terracotta colour for that one, and I can go over that and lighten it up afterwards. And it's got shadow on it, so I can pop a bit of my blue, violet or purple down the other side of it afterwards. And then there's also this one here on the right that comes down into the foreground to here. And it's a lighter tree as well. So it probably doesn't really matter what colour you use as long as it's the right tone and you're picking up the lights and the darks where you need to. So I'm just going to zhoosh this around, mess that up a little bit. And then do a few little loose marks throughout here as well, just to kind of tie in the colours and the shapes. Okay. And then in that tree at the back there, the one we've been working on with the funny hairy branches, just want to try and get the tree trunk back in there before I go too much further. So I'm going to make that black because it is quite dark, and just try to, give that a tree trunk that looks pretty solid. And then I can gently, I'm just sort of going to fiddle around with it now and try and sort of blur that off a little bit. Put some more of this brown in here to get the tree looking a little bit more natural. And I might try some more green actually, just to push it back a bit. I don't want this one to dominate, even though it's brighter than the other trees. I don't want it to kind of jump forward too much. So when you don't want something to be too bright or too dominant, you need to mute it down, kind of send it off into the background a bit more. So to mute it down, use sort of cooler colours and not the brightest colours. So the bright colours you use on things that you want to bring forward, and then the muted colours you use on things that you want to kind of send back. So that, is your blues and your purples and those kinds of colours that are off into the distance. I'm just using a bit of green on here now. I think I've got to go and get sort of a, I don't know what that colour is, more, it's got quite a bit of sunshine in there, hasn't it? I might try some of the yellow and see what works. See if that might work actually. So if I pick up my sunshine yellow that I already used in the bright grassy areas, and maybe pop a little bit of that in throughout these branches to try and catch the light, because you can see the light's catching on the top of some of them. So if I try to keep it fairly loose and light and soft. So that seems to be working okay. Just noticing the shapes. We've got, a couple of branches that sort of come down on the left side there, and then they've got the little ones that come off them. And it's just the top of the branches that's catching the lights, and not all of them are. A lot of them are kind of off in the distance and in the background, so you can't see them quite as clearly. So the light, remembering, it's always good to remember where the light's coming from, and it's being filtered through, obviously, the rest of the trees, so it's only catching on certain sections, not everywhere. So that's important because that's what we want to focus on. Up here, it's a little bit of yellow, bright. I'm actually going to go and find another colour. I feel like it needs to be more like a straw sort of colour. So let's see what I've got, and might use some of that to get the highlights in there too. So like a kind of creamy colour. So this is the one I picked up. It's not white. It's a a yellowy cream kind of colour. So let's see if that'll work. I just feel like the yellow is a bit too bright throughout here. This might be too bright too. Let's see. It's definitely lighter. But we'll try that and see how it goes. We can always like push it in or mute it down if it's looking too much at the end of the day. Now I've picked that up, I feel like I need to put it in a couple of other places. So I'm just going to add that into some of my brighter grassy areas. And it'll kind of tie it all in. We've also got, I can use that here actually in this bright area here in the center. So I had picked up white for that, but that might be bright enough. Sometimes white is a little bit too much, and yellows or creams will suffice nicely. And I have decided that's too bright back there. So I've just picked up my little bit of dark green. I'm just zhooshing over the top, just running my pastel really lightly over the top of those lines I've just done on that tree there, just to kind of mute them down a little bit. Yours might be fine, so don't feel like you have to do that. If you're happy with it, then leave it as it is. So again, that's the nice thing about pastels is, you know, you can kind of go over things and redo them and fix them up and come back and undo them again. So there's a lot of forgiveness in pastels. It's, you know, unlike watercolor, if once you've done it in watercolor, that's it. You can't sort of fix it or change it. But pastels you can, which is what I love the best. Just putting a bit more of that light in there. Oh, that's lovely. Nice. Now, while I've got this light one in my hand, so that's the one I just grabbed. It's a straw sort of creamy colour. I'm going to pop it on that tree back there. See that tree there? I didn't want to use white, but this I think will work quite nicely to get the highlight on that side of it there. And then this tree here has not as bright, but it's got similar tones or colours. So I'm going to use it on there as well. Lovely. It's amazing what a cream or a, another colour other than white will do. And you want to get some lights in. Cool, cool. All right, put that away so I don't get too carried away with my light. And again, I just want to carry on through the back here. So I'm going to go back to my brown and just start to do a few more, just smudging off what I've got in there now to sort of soften it all. We want to send all this background into the background. It doesn't want to, we don't want that to dominate. What we want to dominate in this particular picture is the brights and the darks. I'm going to pop a bit of the brown down through here in the grass as well, just to tie it all in and give it a bit of warmth. So because the brown is a red base, it's a lovely warm kind of tone. So that's nice. Okay, so that's softened off some of that into the background now. Just going to define this branch a little bit more in between the bits and pieces. Now I've picked up black. So black, you can't get any blacker than black. So this is where you want to be using it on your darkest areas. Okay, so if we study the background, you can see that there's quite a lot of dark through there. And I'm just going to press lightly and sort of smush it around a little bit to try and create some depth. And as I do, I'm pulling my short stick, so I've got it lying flat on my page like that. I'm just kind of pulling it around in different directions to get the feeling of some of those trees and their branches. And they crisscross, you know, in front of each other. So across this bright tree that we just put in before with that cream colour, you can crisscross some of your branches through there. See how they've got, it's either shadows or actual branches that sit in front of that. And then down through here, so now we're going to start using black to put in these beautiful dark trees. Okay, so down through there, that lovely dark tree that comes across there. That makes the brights pop because it's against the dark. And again, I'm just going to smush this around and get a little bit of dark shading and tones through here in the background. If you have any questions, pipe up. Let me know. I'm just marking in the darkest areas that you can see. So using black, get those lovely, strong, dark tree trunks going on through there. And then as they kind of wander off into the top of the picture, they sort of get a little bit blurred and lost, don't they? But they're much more defined against those bright grasses. It's nice. Lovely, nice. And also, remember, nearly forgot, we need to put a bit of shadow onto the right-hand side of these ones with the light on them. So those trees that we put the highlights on, just need to shadow them off on the right side because the light is obviously coming from the left. And so the right-hand side will be in shadow. And I'm using blue violet to do that because it's such a great colour for shadow. Okay. Now, anyone want to speak or not? No? Okay. Sorry. Heard a little noise. Okay. So blue violet for your shadows. Gorgeous, gorgeous, gorgeous. Lovely, lovely. And while I've got that in my hand, I'm now starting to kind of run around the picture with it and just putting it here and there where I can see shadow. So now we're starting to build up a little bit more of the detail and getting some of those lights and darks going on. Now, if you don't want to use black straight away, you can always use your blue violet for your darks and then come back over with black afterwards. Okay, so just finding some of the darker shapes. So they're all shapes. Everything's a shape. Just defining those things and marking them in as you go. So most of the trees start at the top half of the page, don't they? They sit in the top section there, above your halfway line. And then in the foreground is mostly the grasses, plus a couple of little trees wandering off there to the left. So just keeping that in mind too, about how far down you bring those trees. We do have this one here on the right, this dark one that comes below your halfway mark. So it comes down into the light grasses here. But then there's also shadow across from that. I'm quite liking keeping my marks lovely and loose today and having a bit of a play with the texture and not blending things too much. So remember too, even though I'm putting some black down on this shadow area through the grass there, because I want to darken that off a little bit more. And I can come back over that again if I want to add more green or lighten it again or just, have a bit of a play with it. So don't be afraid to come back again and touch things up. You can always add more layers. Well, not always. There is a point where you can't add any more layers, but at this point, you should be able to get a few more layers on there and start to build it up nice. So I feel like I need to add more dark over on this tree that we fiddled with in the beginning. I feel like it needs to have a bit more dark in behind it. So it's too light. It's coming forward too much. So I'm going to I'm zhooshing my black around in here. So I'm just literally just running it around, making different shapes, trying to create some darkness behind that. And I might have to come back in and do a bit more work on those branches in there. Still feel they're a bit light. So it's all about the tone, isn't it? And not necessarily the colour. I might try that golden yellow again. I think it's a little bit too sunny, but we'll see. Just squiggling that around. Don't know, undecided still. Need to put the trunk back in. So keep losing the trunk of this one, and then it kind of becomes insignificant. So maybe I need to strengthen that a little bit. That's looking better. Yeah. And then it can come down through there. Add a bit of green in here to push it back into the horizon a bit further. And a bit of light green. So now you sort of, at this stage, I kind of tend to pick up, you know, one colour and then grab another one and put it down. And so it might seem a little bit chaotic. Apologies if that's what's happening for you. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? When you sort of, when I start getting into this, a lot of it's instinct, and you just pick up different colours as you go and put them down and then pick up more and carry on. And it all becomes quite instinct. And I might kind of forget to tell you that I've picked up dark green and not light green or whatever, and you get a little bit lost. So apologies for that. I do get a bit carried away. Okay, so that's starting to come together. I feel like I've just put a fair bit of my mid-green down again into the grasses, and it's nearly a little bit too light in some spots. So I can go back in and start refining it a little bit more. And just checking your light all the time. Just keep checking. You know, where's my lightest part? Do I need to brighten it up a little bit? So I'm just looking at behind this tree on the left here. I feel like I need a little bit more yellow in there just to brighten up that section. And then there should be some more yellow or lighter tones through here. As I'm doing the grasses, I'm starting to now do little short up and down kind of movements with my pastel. So I'll show you what I'm talking about. Rather than running my pastels across like this, because that's what we started off doing, just to get some pastel onto the paper. Now, when I'm coming into the grass area, especially the stuff in the foreground, I want that to be a bit more defined now and to build up the layers and get it nice and lush and thick. So I'm going to start to do little kind of movements like this so that I'm going more up and down in a grass shape rather than across in big blocks. So what will happen hopefully is as you keep doing that, so just a little up and down, you can use the pastel on its side if you want to, but trying to keep your movement in a vertical motion, because that way it'll start to build up that grassy effect. And depending on what pastel you've got, this is a square one, so I'm getting quite a lot of hard edges in here. But I can then kind of twist it around and use the tip of it and start to just do little grassy shapes like that. And that's how we can build up the layers. And then you can pick up your darker one and do the same thing. And just, you know, just be aware of the shape of the thing that you're painting or drawing and the direction that it grows in. So you can see through here, I've done these little up and down kind of movements, and it's starting to look like it's got grassy, you know, pieces in there. So as we work up the layers and build the layers up in the painting, then you start to sort of focus more on the shapes and the textures and try to emulate that with the way you move your pastel around. So that's kind of my plan. You don't have to do every blade of grass, and you don't have to make it all you know, all like that. But even if you just put a little bit of detail, for instance, in here in the foreground, so you could just do some little, this kind of little leafy foliage growth going on through there. So see, I'm just doing these little shapes. I'm not drawing in every little leaf. You can if you want to. But just doing little shapes like that that represent those things. And then that will kind of bring it all together. And if you work in more detail in the foreground and then less in the background, so the stuff in the background can be kind of a bit more vague, a bit, you know, softer, wandering off and not quite as defined as the things in the foreground. And that's what keeps them in the background, is just the lack of definition and the softness. Speaking about that, I'm just popping a bit of, I can just see some little, you know, sunshiny bits back there. And I don't want those to be really bright. So, you know, if I pressed hard with my pastel, like this, for instance, that's going to make it too bright. See how that really brightened up that little piece just there? And so it kind of draws your eye and you look straight at it. If you don't want that to happen, then you need to soften off those marks. So if you have pressed a little hard, just coming in with my blue violet, I can just soften that off again, run over with my darker pastel and mute it down. Yeah, so it's always a good option. So if you do something that's a bit too bright, you can just mute it down a little bit with your softer colours, your purples and your blues and things. At the same time, I still want to get some of those lighter, you know, shiny bits back in there, because that tells a story. It gives us more information. It tells us this is a wild kind of mystical forest. And I feel like I need to make it even darker in some places just to make it look a bit more interesting and mysterious. I'll put a bit of yellow onto this tree here. So don't be afraid to muck around with some colours and just test different things. That tree back there is catching the light just on one spot or a couple of spots there on the left-hand side of it. And so it's nice to, you know, use the different colours to emphasise that. You don't always have to use the actual colour that's in it. So I like the yellow. I think it's quite warm and lovely. And it really brings it alive and makes it seem a bit more interesting and mysterious. And if you don't like it, then you can mute it down. As I said before, you can soften that off. You know, I could put a bit of brown over it to quieten it down, or if you wanted to brighten it up a bit more, you could pop some the creamy colour or a bit of white or Australian grey or something like that. So I'm just wandering around now with this yellow because it's in my hand and doing a few little marks through there to indicate, you know, the foliage and the grasses and things that are catching the light through there. Okay, so I'm going to go back into this tree back here because I kind of like it. Put some of that creamy colour over the yellow, so that's now gotten rid of the brightness of the yellow, but it's kept the light on the tree, which is gorgeous because it kind of leads your eye through the painting. And when you do something, you know, a painting, what my goal is for, you know, to kind of focus on a focal point. For instance, this bright section here on the grass, that'll be the bright part that really pops when you first look at it. But then you want your eye to kind of wander through the trees and discover other things and make it interesting. And so when you do that, I can come through the trees and I can see there's light on the grass there and there's a bit of light there. That's telling me where the sun is. It's telling me that it's daytime. Maybe it's, I don't know, late afternoon. And then, you know, I kind of look through and then I can come to these lighter trees and they catch your eye because they're a little bit brighter. And then they make the dark ones pop even more because of the brightness. So, you know, it's nice to have a goal when you're doing a painting and to decide, you know, what you want to feature or to be the highlight, or the focus, and where you want someone to look. Okay. Cool, bananas. All right, so I'm just going to keep putting a little bit more light in through here. I've got my cream pastel, which that's one I've been using for light. And I'm just pressing very lightly because I don't want it to be too bright. I don't want it to dominate, but I still want to have a little bit of, you know, shine going on back there. That tells us that there's distance and sunshine and detail and stuff going on. So just looking at all the shapes through there, knowing I can mute it down again if I want to. Putting a little bit of light through here in the grasses again, so it looks like there's little like flowers or weeds or something, and they're catching, the tops of them are catching the light. It's kind of cute, almost like butterflies. If you get in really close, it could be well, they're not, but they could look like the shapes of butterflies. Just sort of poking out at the top of the grass here. And so but as I said before, you don't have to do every little detail. You can just kind of do some little dots and marks and get them to pop out like that. The other thing to be careful of when you're doing the lights like this is to make sure you don't overdo it, because if you do too much light, then you lose your impact. So remember save the lights for last, and or not even last, but just make sure that you don't overdo it, because if you want to have something like this that really pops with your darks and lights, then you want to make sure you don't overdo the lights, because then it sort of gets a bit saturated and loses the impact. I'm just muting some of this, putting some of this lighter green in. I feel like I want to darken that off again now, and it's good because I can. It's nice to have a few little bits and bobs in the foreground there, so you can see in the very foreground down the bottom of the picture, there's a couple of little plants or bigger leaves basically that sit there in the foreground. So that also helps to create distance and perspective. Now I haven't used this lemony yellow yet. Let's see what that might do. See if that's a little bit brighter than the creamy colour. Yeah, it is. Look at that. Gorgeous. That can be my brightest rather than white. Even though white is lighter, sometimes it's a little bit too dull, and you'll find you'll get more shine or glow if you have something with a bit of yellow in it. A little bit of gold. That's nice. So be very sparing with your lightest colour. And I'm not going to put that anywhere else except right there in the middle for now. May change my mind, which has been done before. Okay, I'm going to grab my black again. So I just want to darken up these trees a little bit more, just to emphasize them. And again, you can, look for your blackest areas, and you'll notice that once you do that and get it in there against the light, it's really going to make everything more dramatic. Probably missed a couple of trees. There should be another one about there, I think, skinny one. You can add some in if you want to, or take them out, whatever you like. This is your painting, so you get to decide what it looks like. I want to keep the brightness of that tree at the back there, because I really like how that's looking against all the dark. And just make sure when you do this black one in the front, especially this one, make sure you get that edge of it nice and sharp against that light. Lovely. So it's kind of fun, and you can keep playing with, you know, your darks and your lights and fiddling around with them to see what works and what doesn't. And try to remember too that, you know, you don't have to put all the detail in. So I can darken off this background even more because I really, really want that to be blacker. And then you can just put a few little marks in there to indicate branches and, you know, lines and so forth. You don't have to put every single thing in, because the lovely thing about art is that we make it up. We can see things that aren't even there. But if we have a hint of something, like a hint of a tree or branches, we'll just see them anyway, because that's what eyes do. You don't have to tell everything. You can let some of it be left up to the imagination. So I'm just working on the background a little bit more, thickening it up with some more dark detail, and then crisscrossing. See those little branches that crisscross across that light tree? Just want to put a few marks across that just to push it away into the distance a bit more, and, you know, let us know that there are other branches and trees and things in front of it. Same with the other one that's lighter on the right there. And if you look closely, you can see some of these branches, they're quite dark or black, but then they also have, some of them are catching the light as well. So you might want to pop a little bit of a light line on the left or top side of some of those branches, just to indicate again that, you know, there's light coming through. You can add things in or change them around. I've just put an almost horizontal branch on this one here because it looks like a fairly big tree, that one. It's quite dark and chunky. So just to break up those lines a little bit, to, you know, not have everything all going in the same direction. So bringing that across just to break the line a bit and make it a little bit more interesting. So you do have lots of freedom with where you put things and what shapes you use. Okay, so I might finish off in the background now, even though I keep getting back in there and mucking around with it. I want to work towards the front. So again, I want to start to get a bit more depth into this foreground area and create a bit more shadow and dark. So I'm starting to, like I talked about before, running my pastel in a little vertical shapes so that we're starting to get the feeling of grass and foliage down through here. Because as we get closer to the foreground, we want to put more detail in. We want to give more information so that you can kind of tell what's there and what's not. And obviously the closer it is to us, the more detail we can see. So as we come forward, and what's clear, what we can see. So this foliage in the corners, in the front corners, are quite dark. Now, obviously they're in shadow or shade or whatever, but making sure we keep that nice and dark, but we also want to make sure that we get some information in there to tell us what's in there. So there's a lot of leaves and what looks like vines or something in through there. I don't know if you can see it that clearly. And we don't, as I said, you don't need to put every single little bit of foliage in there, but we do need to indicate the shapes at least. And that's why I'm still keeping my little movements in a vertical kind of way, so that we try and indicate the depth and the movement of what's happening through here. And so even though we've got lighter green sections and and then, you know, bright areas. Underneath, there's always shadows. So we need to add a little bit of dark under the greens, which is what I'm doing here. And then I can come back in with my green over the top and sort of build that up a bit more to thicken it up, make it lovely and lush. And I'm really enjoying the black. I don't use black very often, but when you do it, it just, yeah, it gives you such a lovely depth and strength. It's nice. So that's looking all right. I'm going to pick up my brown again because I just want to warm up some of this area here in the foreground. Still want to keep it reasonably dark, but just to give it a bit of an earthy tone. I keep thinking about blue. I want to go and get blue and stick it in there. Blue is beautiful with your earth colours. Can't help myself. I've got to go and get a bit of blue now. All right. So an ultramarine blue, beautiful, similar to the colour on the tape on my paper. Would be quite lovely. In there. I think, if not, I'll get rid of it, but let's try it. So this is the blue. Clean it off a little bit. So you've probably seen a bit of blue in, you know, artworks before. I think it just gives it such a lovely, and it's a lovely mid-tone kind of colour too. So that's a nice one to put in with your mid-tone green. Just, yeah, I like it. You may not, and that's okay. I do enjoy what that does. Just adds a different dimension to it, doesn't it? Makes it a bit more interesting. So your blues and your purples are beautiful for your shadows and your mids, and just really gives it some body and depth. We haven't done that tree in the foreground yet, so you might not want to. I'm not sure I want to put that in. I might put it in lightly and see what it looks like. First, I just want to carry on with the grass back here a little bit. Still build that up a tiny bit more. And remember, working from back to front is always the easier option. So I don't want to put that foreground tree in and then have to work around it. So I'd rather get everything kind of done first, and then I can pop it over the top. Just popping a little bit more of my lighter green in through here, where it's a little bit lighter, and creating a bit of interest throughout that section there. So as you come forward, and if you want to put more detail in, you can start to use the end of your pastel and just try to do a few little grassy kind of lines or marks that might help to, you know, demonstrate the foliage and the texture of it. So especially around, for instance, in front of this tree at the base, just realised I've got a bit of dust on there. Didn't put my cloth out for the dust. Anyway, so around like this area here, if you want to do a little bit of grass sort of shapes at the base of that, so that kind of plants it in amongst the foliage, really. Doesn't just leave it sitting there as a tree trunk in the middle of nothing. So do a little bit of foliage around that. And you could do the same, although it's a bit lighter up in there, but up through here, got a little bit of grass. So that's that tree in the middle. Actually, there's a bit of light on the bottom of that one, I've just noticed. I'll pick up my yellow. I'm going over black with yellow, which probably is not ideal, but it might be just enough for this one. Yeah, that works quite well actually. So just that touch of light on the front of this tree here. And my yellow isn't very strong over the top of black, but it's enough for this one. Cool. Put a bit more light through there. Okay, and there's also kind of a bright bit through here at the base of that tree. It's got a little, like a root or something coming forward. So that's a bit too bright. So I can quieten that down again, pop a bit of my green over the top of that light colour, just to move it down a bit. That doesn't look right either. So get a bit of brown, see how that does. So see how you can just keep sort of trying things until you get it how you want it to be. Yeah, that's better. So don't be afraid to try different things, colours and so forth. Need to blacken that off again. And when you want your colours to be nice and strong, just press a bit harder and then you'll get it thicker and stronger on your paper. Okay. Remember too, when you're doing trees, not to put your branches just off to the left and the right. They come down in front as well, so you want to do some more kind of vertical shapes just to indicate, you know, the direction that the trees or branches grow. For instance, this one over here, that's why that was looking weird. We forget that and we just, you know, think they come out from the sides, but they come out from all directions. So you have to draw them in all directions. Lovely, lovely. I'm just going to put a bit more information down at the base of this one. See how you can kind of keep wandering around the painting. So even though we started at the back and we're working forward, we can still hop into the back and touch things up as you go. Because you keep seeing things that you want to add to or change or adjust or highlight or darken. And that's fine, that's normal. So you can always hop back in and, you know, change stuff around a little bit. That light bit's too high there. Darken that and light, push it down a bit. In fact, I'm going to sort of nip that off. It doesn't make much sense now. There we go. So it's all coming together slowly, slowly. Just noticing the details, getting all the, you know, little. Now we're doing all the little finer marks. So you can see through as we come forward from the trees, we've got a few little, I don't know, odd trees and little bits of branch that are lying down on the ground, different wispy sort of shapes. So just drawing in a few of those will help to give it some more density and make it look a little bit more wild and you know, rugged, I guess. Okay. Just to, you know, break up the lines, always add a couple of vertical or horizontal marks to make it a bit more interesting. Cool, cool. And then just going to do a few more little highlights in amongst the grass here with my creamy colour. You can see so there's like little weeds or flowers that are catching the light. And there's some little, you know, strokes up vertical marks as well. And if you feel like you've got them too bright, then you can just pat them with your finger and soften them off a little bit. I'm surprised I haven't blended anything yet. It's pretty cool. Usually I love blending and getting my fingers into it, pushing the colour around on the paper. Okay. So I just want to highlight a few more bits and bobs over here. This is quite, where's my lemon colour gone? I said I wouldn't use it again, but I am going to. I'm just going to pop a little bit of it in here where that lighter green or golden colour is through there. And if I don't press too hard, then it's not going to be as bright as that centerpiece that I want to highlight. And I can always come back over that with some lighter green or the golden colour if I want to change it a little bit or add to it. Nice, nice. All right, so I'm just about ready to put these trees in the left, on the left-hand side there, the bright ones, and see what happens. So a few more little dots and dashes around here. I might just pop in a bit more green, my lighter green through here. There we go. So it's very, very loose, this painting. We've kept it fairly, maybe abstract. It's not, I'm not sure that's the right word, but it's definitely much looser than what we normally do. And it's kind of fun, isn't it, to just be loose and study colour and tone more so than, all the finer details. It's quite nice to do that. Okay, I'm just checking my painting. So when you, always step back if you can, or look at it from a distance and just check how it's going and what it looks like compared to your reference photo. It's always good to do that. And just double check that, you've got everything where you need it to be. I mean, we could spend a lot more time on this. And if you've got time this afternoon, then you might be inspired to do that, because it's quite lovely, this one. Magical forest. I'm just sticking a bit of yellow over here to add a bit of warmth. It's not sticking very well. So what happens when your layers get pretty thick, then you have more trouble making the pastel stick to the paper because there's already enough on there. And again, it depends on the kinds of pastels you've got. So this is a Art Spectrum Extra Soft. So they're lovely, really super soft, but it doesn't want to hang on to the darker colour underneath. So that's okay. Just about done anyway. Still going to put a bit more yellow on that bit there. All right, let's put this tree into the left-hand side and see what we think. Just do it lightly. I might even use a bit of charcoal actually, because I know I can kind of cover that up a bit easier. So I'm just going to get a charcoal stick and draw it across. It might work, it might not. Down to here. Yeah, I don't mind it actually, because it sort of gives me more dimension. All right, so I'm going to do that, I think. Anyway, let's go with it. You don't have to. If you've decided you don't like it, then by all means leave it out. Just picked up my black pastel. I'm going to press pretty hard just so I can make it stick through all those layers that are there. And bring that down into my foreground just here and soften off. where it comes in. To zoom in and see what that's doing. So it's kind of merging off into all the darkness down here. You can't really see anything much. So that's across there, and then we've got a few vertical ones that sort of go like that. Yeah, I don't mind that. Makes it a bit more interesting. Could potentially add a bit of brown to it because it is closer to us in the picture, so we're going to be able to see a little bit more of the detail. You could even thicken it up if you wanted to. And then I might put a bit of blue violet on there as well. Yeah, cool. And then just highlight those ones again. Are they in front or behind? I think they're in front by the looks. Bring those ones down through there. Do they go all the way to the top of the picture? Hard to tell. But that's kind of nice because that now brings that forward and we've got a bit more perspective and a feeling of, you know, being right there. Cool. All right, so just double checking your picture now. So if you feel like you need to stand up and step back and have a look, do that. It's always good to have a look at it from a distance, definitely. So it just gives you a completely different perspective when you look at it from a distance. I've got it in front of me here on my computer screen, so I've kind of got both views sitting here with it in front of me on the table and also on the screen. So that's helpful because you get a new perspective. There's a few more branches and stuff going on in there if you want to add even more information. And I think we're just about done. So that was kind of fun. Just want to add a little bit more highlight through here. So now's the time to start noticing just those finer little details where you might need to add a bit more light. If you can't figure it out, it's often, and you haven't got the black and white picture handy, if you squint at your reference photo, so look at it through your eyelashes, and that's when you see the lightest lights and the darkest darks. Doing that, I can see I need to add a little bit more light in here. But pretty happy with how that's all looking. With my cream there. So I think we're just about done, and I would love to see your painting when you've finished it. So please do send it through to me. I put student photos up onto my website, and I also pop them into my weekly newsletter. So it's fun to share, and we all like to see what everyone's doing. And it's nice to see your own artwork out there. Okay, so I'm going to call that one done for today, and I'm just going to take a quick photo for the purposes of marketing. And then we'll switch over to the other screen and see how everybody went, if that's okay. Lovely. All right. So that's our forest picture for today. I'll just zoom out, and there is the reference photo in the finished piece, which could do with a little bit more work, but I'm pretty happy with how that's worked out so far. Not too bad at all. Okay, so if you're watching this recording, thank you for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed the class, and I really look forward to seeing you again and seeing your artwork. So don't be afraid to share. Ciao for now.